Every October in northern Vermont, the wind slid down the mountains with a kind of restless energy, stealing color from the maples and stripping the birches bare. By mid-month, the leaves lay so thick on the ground that the earth itself disappeared beneath them. It was tradition, almost ritual, for the Fuller family to rake everything into a single, massive mound at the far edge of their backyard. A warm, golden-brown hill, taller than their son, Matthew. 8-year-old Matthew used to love it. He'd sprint across the yard, launch himself into the pile, and vanish inside the leafy avalanche with a whoosh and a laugh. His parents, Laura and Sean Wood, smiled at the sound of him giggling somewhere inside the mound, thrashing joyfully, resurfacing like a swimmer in an autumn sea. But that year, late October, just before Halloween, something changed. At first, Matthew started glancing toward the leaf pile with a quiet stiffness, like someone watching a sleeping dog they weren't sure would wake friendly. When the wind blew, he'd inch closer to his parents, and when the rake scraped too close to the mound, he'd wince. On the third Sunday of the month, when the pile had reached its usual towering size, Laura called out the tradition. "All right, Matta, go for it." "Nothing," she turned. Matthew stood a few yards away, hands clenched in the sleeves of his jacket, his small face pale. "Mom, I don't want to." Sean glanced over. "Buddy, you feeling okay? You love leaf jumps." But Matthew only shook his head. He wouldn't look at the pile. Later that night, when the dinner dishes were drying and the last of the twilight had bled away behind the pines, Laura sat beside Matthew on his bed. His room smelled faintly of the apples they'd picked earlier that week. "Cozy, safe, Matty," she said gently, brushing hair from his forehead. "Why won't you jump in the leaves anymore?" He pressed his lips together. For a long moment, Laura thought he wouldn't answer at all. Then, in the smallest whisper, "There's someone in them." The words crawled through her. "Someone." She forced a smile. "Honey, there's nobody out there." "Maybe a squirrel." Matthew shook his head violently. "It's not a squirrel. He swallowed. It talks. He nodded, eyes wide, wet around the edges. "It whispers. When the wind stops. When it's really quiet." Laura pulled him into a hug, but he was stiff, rigid, like he was listening for something even then, that night. After he finally fell asleep, she told Sean, they both chalked it up to imagination. The kind that comes from too many Halloween commercials and too little sleep. But just past midnight, Laura woke with a start. The house was silent. Outside wasn't a sound threaded through the open crack of their bedroom window. A faint, breathy sound. A hush, 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 like someone whispering without words. Not quite wind. Not quite voice. Something in between. Laura sat up. Sean stirred beside her. "You okay? Did you hear that?" He listened. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "Probably just the trees." But neither of them believed it fully. Laura went to the window and peeked out. Their yard was a dark ocean under the moon, but the leaf pile wasn't still. It shifted, not the way wind moves leaves, skittering, fluttering, rolling. This was slower, heavier, a swell, as though something underneath was rising, pushing upward, searching for the surface. "Sean," she hissed. "Look." He was already grabbing a flashlight. "Stay inside," he said. She watched him step outside in his slippers, cold breath puffing out in uneven clouds. He walked toward the pile carefully, the beam of his flashlight slicing across the grass. When he drew close, The leaves rustled not playfully, but with intention, like something was rearranging itself inside. The mound swelled, Sean froze. The light trembled in his hand. Then, just for a heartbeat, he saw it, something pale between the layers of leaves. A flash of shape, a curve, maybe fingers, maybe a cheek, maybe an eye half open, or maybe just the moon catching on a shard of birch bark, or something else entirely. But the sight hit him deep, low, primal. A warning in the spine. He swallowed, lifted the rake he'd brought, and poked the pile. The leaves collapsed inward, not down like a disturbed heap, but inward as though there was a hole beneath them, and everything had just fallen through. The rustling stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt alive. Sean backed away, flashlight quivering. When he came inside, he locked the door behind him, even though they were in the middle of nowhere and had never locked it before. "What did you see?" Laura whispered. He opened his mouth, closed it. "I don't know," he finally said. But his eyes said he absolutely did. Neither slept well. The whispering didn't return, but both of them woke multiple times, listening for it anyway. At dawn, frost silvered the grass. When Sean went out to check the pile again, Laura followed, though she kept Matthew inside. The leaf mound was different, now partially sunk, like bread dough that had deflated. Overnight, Sean nudged the side with his boot. It crackled in a way leaves shouldn't, stiff, damp, disturbed. "Look," Laura said suddenly, near the base. A tunnel had been carved right through the pile. A small passage burrowed in darkness, disappearing underneath the slats of their porch. Something had crawled in, or crawled out. Beside the tunnel were tracks, not paw prints, not boots, long indentations in the frost, too long, too thin, and too deep to belong to any animal they recognized. The impressions curled slightly at the ends, like fingers dragging. Sean backed away. "We're burning it." Laura didn't argue. That afternoon, they soaked the leaves in lighter fluid and set them ablaze. The fire snapped and roared, sending sparks into the cold air. The smell was thick and oily, nothing like the usual sweet aroma of burning autumn leaves. The fire billowed upward suddenly, like something inside had inhaled sharply. The flames turned strangely pale, for a moment almost white, before settling back to normal orange. Matthew watched from the porch steps, knees to his chest, eyes enormous and unblinking. When the last embers died, Sean stamped the ashes flat, just to be sure. They didn't rake leaves into a pile for the rest of the season. By winter, the first snowfall covered the yard in a clean, innocent blanket of white. The tunnel under the porch filled in naturally with ice and debris. No more whispers. No rustling. Matthew seemed lighter, happier, the way kids do when something frightening gets smothered under the normalcy of everyday life. But spring melted the snow, summer came, and then it was fall again. The leaves fell early that year, thick and crimson. They didn't make a pile this time. They mulched the leaves where they fell and kept an eye on the porch. But the season passed without incident. No whispers, no shifting. Then, on a windy night in mid-November, Laura heard it again, a soft whispering, almost too quiet to detect. She froze on the landing, holding a basket of laundry, breath caught in her throat. Maybe it was wind. Maybe it wasn't. It seemed to come from near Matthew's window. She went to check on him. He wasn't asleep. He sat upright in bed, staring at his window as the wind rattled the frame. Before she could speak, he whispered, "Do you hear it too, Mommy?" She did, a voice thin as smoke threaded through the glass. Not speech, exactly, just a sound, shaped like a want. Warm breath. Warm breath. The curtains shivered, though the window was closed. Under the porch, something shifted, scraping lightly. Patiently, Matthew leaned closer to her, trembling. "It's back," he whispered. "It knows we didn't let it in last time." Laura wrapped an arm around him, heart slamming. Matthew whispered, "What does it want?" She didn't answer. Out in the yard, the leaves rustled without wind. A soft, rising hiss. Somewhere beneath the porch, something lengthened itself, stretching toward the sound of Matthew's voice, waiting for him, waiting for breath warm enough to follow. And the whisper returned, clearer this time. "Let me in."